Hi, everyone. My name is Ginger Haggerty, and I am a senior associate with the Economic Mobility Exchange. And I'm excited to be here today, or rather do this recording for you all, of a brief but hopefully informative overview of mobility mentoring, and specifically the 4 elements that make it up, with more focus on the bridge self-sufficiency, goal setting, really how those two are connected, and then coaching for economic mobility, which is really how we use the tools or how we approach our work and the model. So I wanted to, first start this off with a little bit of video just to say hello. I know we were going to do this live. That would have been wonderful, but I wanted to at least show my face and say that I'm very excited to work with you all in the future. And I'm now just going to go ahead and jump in to the overview. Following this recording, I'm happy. I look forward to setting up time and maybe doing another call where we do a Q&A session about the content that I'll cover today. So thank you all, and just give me a second. I'm going to go ahead and turn the video off. So as many of you may already know from your packets that were put together about mobility mentoring, the approach, the variety of tools that were pulled from the online exchange portal. Mobility mentoring is a model that we use and created here in Boston. I'm working with our, in our different programs, but that mainly focus on either emergency shelter or transitional housing. So for us, we actually created this model over 10 years ago. I think the origin date was actually about 14 years ago from when we really started conceptualizing what the model is. I think what's most important about the model is to think about it's a partnership model. So the idea is that we're coming to this work with our participants and really partnering with them to figure out what do they want for themselves in their lives and how can we be a support for them as they're really looking across their life and deciding maybe where they're motivated to set goals, where they kind of see opportunity for themselves, and really kind of being that person to both support them by coaching them through, strategizing around goals, to also being that person who, because you're in this together, there's also an accountability piece. So, we're showing up and investing in them. And the idea is that over time, they're also realizing that, it's an equal investment into their future, and that we're there to support that effort. So the model itself is made up of these 4 different essential elements. First, we have the coaching for economic mobility piece. Then we have the bridge self-sufficiency, which really speaks to looking across someone's life at those 5 different domains, and how, we really, in life, we're rarely just working in one area, but how they're really all connected, and that when we're strategizing and setting goals for the future, it's beneficial to look across your life, even if you're focusing really in one area. Of course, then that was just chatting about how, the bridge does connect to that goal setting piece, where from the bridge and those conversations, you start listening in for goal talk. So I wish, I want, I hope. So connecting that conversation to goals that people might want to pursue, whether they're short term, a week, 2 weeks, to maybe really long term, maybe a year or 2 or longer. And then recognition, which for us is building in into the whole process that we want to recognize people's successes, but we want them to recognize that they're putting in a lot of hard work, they're achieving things, and they should be proud of that. And that recognition can then go back into building in that intrinsic motivation. So when we talk about extrinsic motivation, so what we do, whether it's giving awards or shout outs or maybe cash incentives to our participants, over time, that extrinsic motivation, so coming from us, can then, the goal is to internalize that, and that they find their own motivation towards their goals for being more self-sufficient and more stable in the future. The first tool that I want to really dive into is the bridge of self-sufficiency. Now, this is MPAS Bridge that we use here locally in Boston, Massachusetts, with our Greater Boston programs. And what you might be using with your participants might be different. The idea within the model is that we adapt and change, that the bridge itself is adaptable to different populations. in different programs. So you all know the folks, the youth that you're working with better than we could. So what kind of the ethos is what we really want to hold on to when we think about the bridge. But ultimately, things most likely will change on here as you're thinking about how to, what a bridge might look like working with your younger participants. But what I want to chat about though here is what some of the core tenets of both why the bridge is built the way it is and what ways it can be used and that we've seen to be effective. So one definitely is that it's on one page. That's very important, and I know that you all have looked into or learned more about executive functioning, but mobility mentoring as a whole is executive functioning informed. So the idea is that through our coaching approach and through using these tools, we're able to both focus on people's executive functioning strengths and really try to bolster those and just make them both aware that they have those strengths and support them as they start engaging with their executive functioning skills through this process of doing the self-assessment, setting goals, and strategizing for their future. So the executive functioning pieces here on the bridge we have the making decisions and context on the bottom. So that's just trying to keep in mind that we're looking across the whole bridge, not just one pillar, and that they're really always connected, even if it doesn't always feel obvious that, our lives, once again, we're rarely ever in one pillar at a time, that we often, a goal can touch many different areas on the bridge. And then on the left side, you see thinking about the future. So mobility mentoring itself is future oriented. We're thinking about how we can support our participants forward. And that way it also helps us, if you have participants in crisis, the bridge itself is oriented for you to engage with that person, obviously maybe address those crises, but try to always orient towards the future or the goals that that person was focusing on. But the executive functioning piece here, one last one that I want to point out is that it's a visual tool. So for folks who are more visual, who want to see the 5 different pillars, the bridge, the arrow on the side and the bottom, they can kind of see how it all fits together. And then for someone who's more of a visual, who's more learns faster or kind of takes in information if it's written down, we have all the information on here. So for us, we wanted to be clear and really honest with our participants. So we really put all the information on there, even if that top rung might feel a little daunting or maybe out of people's reach. Our approach is we want people to have the information that top rung is what it takes to be self-sufficient in the greater Boston area. It's not that we expect everyone to reach that point within our programs, but we want the bridge to be aspirational. We want people to, maybe they're working with you for, up to 12 to 18 months, but beyond that, they can take this home and use it as a way to think about other goals or other things they want to achieve in their life. So the bridge also is an aspirational tool, and it's meant to go with the participant. It's meant to be something that they self-assess on where they're at in all these different pillars. Then they're also meant to take this home and feel ownership over it, and instead of maybe just filling something out, giving it back to us as a coach and having the ownership being out of their hands. So the bridge itself is definitely one of the central tool, I definitely can say. And it also just really helps guide the work and helps also coaches. So beyond working with your participants, it helps coaches always reorient back to an anchor. So I think of the bridge as really the anchor piece of the mobility mentoring model, where you're working with someone and maybe they complete a goal, which is fantastic, but they don't know where to go next. You can always go back around and say, well, let's take a look at your bridge and see where else you were where else you were hoping to make strides, or we can go back and see where you've made progress. Like, let's see where you're at now. So the bridge itself is also really valuable in being that anchor, or that piece that you can return to when you might need to think more broadly. So maybe many of us have expertise in one or two areas, and maybe that's really where you gravitate. The bridge can be that tool that helps you go back to it and say, we haven't really had a conversation about, education and training. Can you tell me about your educational experience? or something like that. One thing I definitely touched on here a couple times is this idea of a bridge conversation or a bridge assessment. So we use the bridge as a way in our initial assessments with our participants. That doesn't mean we pull this out on the very first meeting when we've had someone who moves into our shelter that same day. Many times people, depending on the circumstances, that first meeting might be they're in crisis. It might be, you need a little bit of get to know you time before you jump into a tool like this. But what I can say is that we use this tool very early on because it really frames our work. And for us, we say, we by and large often come on, or our first impressions are, oh, you have emergency shelter, so you only focus on housing. We bring this out early on because we want to be clear with our participants that, yes, we focus on housing because we have shelters, but actually we see, life as all these different areas of your life connected. And that if we actually look more broadly than just maybe focusing on housing, we might be able to help and support you in more than one way other than housing. So we'll bring this out pretty early on and have that bridge conversation. So often for us, they average 45 minutes to an hour, depending on where that person is at or how quickly they move. But really, it's just you sit down, you take this out. You either have it in front of both of you, or maybe if they are unsure, maybe you actually don't look at the bridge. But as a coach, you have all of these pillars in mind as different areas you want to touch on. So the first question we often ask when we start a bridge conversation is, where would you like to start? That these are the 5 domains that we want to look across and support you in. But where would you like to start in this process? So you're working with someone and they say, well, let's start in financial management. Great. For us, then we have on the back end, which I definitely recommend thinking about, is for all the different pillars of the bridge that you end up using, having starter questions that match all of these different areas. So for instance, financial management, for us, if someone says, let's points to financial management, we say, okay, great. Can you tell me a little bit about your finances? Do you have savings? Do you have debt? How do you how do you feel about money? Where did you did you talk about it in your house growing up? A lot of the times it's just getting a conversation going where that person just at least starts giving you a picture of where they're at right now. And through that conversation, maybe we're talking about debt. I ask, do you have any current debt? And that person says, yes. Okay, well, after, looking on this bridge, where do you see yourself? And they go ahead and circle, the second from the bottom. That's great. That gives us a starting point or just a snapshot of where that person is right now. And ultimately, a bridge self-sufficiency completed just has, all the different pillars circled. And that's just an idea that gives you and that person a starting point to move forward. And if they feel particularly maybe not that great about, where they're at, that's okay, because they've taken this first step in working with you. And now the idea is that you can then move forward. That the idea, once again, thinking about the future, that you can, it might be hard to look at now, but, why don't we set a goal in one of, in a pillar that you feel really strongly on, and we can start, moving you up in these different areas. So that bridge conversation is meant to kind of move away from the yes, no, check boxes type of approach, because we want people to feel that they're building a relationship with you, that it's a conversation, and there's no judgment. It's really just trying to get that information. And what I can say as well is that to really help this process as coaches is you do once again want to think about how you can build on the back end that support for coaches. So matching, kind of a short list of questions that you either need to know because for your programs or your grant funding about these different areas, or just kind of starter questions. So if someone feels uncomfortable or you're not sure where to start, you have your little list and you can kind of jump in with those questions in a given area. So I think that thinking about having that guide or that manual that helps you with that assessment can be very, very helpful. Also, definitely thinking about this tool as an anchor. What I mean by that is that through this work and through working with a participant, they are really excited about saving money or really excited about thinking about getting going back to school, and that's wonderful, and they're making, they're setting goals, they're achieving those goals, but then they kind of get stuck. And maybe you also, you're like, oh, where can we get them, how can we get kind of momentum again? The bridge can be a great tool to circle back to say, let's review your bridge and see where else you might be motivated to set a goal. So the bridge itself can be really helpful as coaches for bringing back, kind of bringing back the process or kind of looking across and finding maybe the next goal for a participant, and as a reminder for us that it's valuable to look across someone's life and maybe not get too focused in one or two areas. All right, and now I definitely, you really can't talk about the bridge to sufficiency without talking about goal setting. So this is our goal action plan. And the idea is that this, once again, like the bridge, is the participants, so they would fill it out. Or this is also something to keep in mind. If someone is uncomfortable writing, or you are not sure if they can write, just to kind of be mindful and we're strengths-based. We're not trying to make our participants feel uncomfortable. They can write it, or you can always offer to write the goal out, or you're also you can always also offer to go through the bridge. So that's also something that to keep in mind, is that we are meeting our participants where they're at. If someone has a very maybe a low level literacy, or they're really uncomfortable reading, that's fine. You can still go through this process. You might just need to be the one that goes through the different pillars with that person. So the idea is to make the bridge as accessible as possible to the young people that you're working with. But for the goal setting piece, we've mapped this out. First of all, there's a lot of open space because we do want, the goal is to get participant-driven goals. So what I mean by that is that we are trying to, through this bridge conversation with this tool, we're trying to find out where people are motivated to move forward, to make strides, that are, they're willing to maybe spend some time working on a particular goal in their life. And then here they can really kind of express both what the goal is, and then a couple of other things, like, why is this important to them? Because if it's not important to them, then what's the likelihood that they would achieve it? And that, putting it out there why something is important to them, could be helpful for the future when things get hard, and they can then kind of refer back and say, that's why I'm doing this. This is why, it's worth it. Or they can just kind of return back to why they set this in the first place. The action steps are how we break down or break out goals into manageable bites. We don't necessarily want to just put one giant goal at the top and then no action steps, because then it's harder to strategize about that goal if that person makes a misstep or they're not really sure where to start. What's the likelihood that they would achieve that goal? So for us, we want to have the big goal on top and then break down the goal into manageable action steps that also have target dates. So people will feel as they're moving through these action steps, as they're checking them off as complete, that they're making progress towards that overall goal. And then on the bottom, we just a couple of other areas, just talk about how we know when the goal is done. That speaks to, it's important for all parties involved to know when that person knows that their goal is complete, so they can celebrate, so they can move on to the next goal, and for you as a coach to know when that goal is complete. So if there's any type of specific recognition involved, or just that feeling of this goal is complete, let's move on to the next one. and feeling, and so in being able to support that person through, now moving on to the next, maybe harder goal. And then the potential challenges down towards the bottom is just strategizing right out the gate, trying to take a step back and say, thinking about this goal, what are some potential challenges that you might, kind of come up against? And let's think about how we can overcome them now. So if they do come up, you're not, surprised or feel unable to move past them, that we've already thought about this. Now, these two past things, when we talk about goal setting and the bridge self-sufficiency, they really are connected. So the bridge conversation is really just a conversation unless towards the end of that conversation, you take a look at that person's, their bridge. And then and hopefully as you were going through that conversation, you were jotting down little things. So one thing that really is important to listen for when we're thinking about the bridge self-sufficiency and you're going through these different pillars, and maybe this person is sharing, their story with you and their life, is listening for goal talk. So I wish, I want, I hope. Sometimes people don't necessarily know or really connect those words to goals, but often people will express desires for things, and that in itself could be a goal. So kind of keeping in mind that through this bridge conversation that you're listening for those little cues, or obviously if someone comes out and says, I really want to go back to school. Great, that's a very clear-cut maybe goal that you could focus on. But it's this idea of kind of keeping your ear out as a coach for that kind of talk. And then maybe towards the end of the session saying, why don't we brainstorm a goal? If you run out of time, nobody really wants to be in a meeting longer than an hour or 45 minutes, but you do want to end even a bridge conversation on brainstorming a goal. So when you meet next, you can say, okay, these are some goals we chatted about last time, why don't we map out a plan? Are you interested in mapping out a plan for one of them? So that's the idea, is that the bridge conversation helps you leapfrog into the goal setting process. Now, how do we use these tools? Now, I've been touching on this idea of coaching quite a bit through the last couple slides, but there's a couple things that we really want to keep in mind when we're thinking about coaching for economic mobility. We call it coaching for economic mobility because coaching is very popular. It's a very popular term right now, and we just want to make sure that there's a couple of things that are highlighted. One, for us, our coaching approach is really connected to our bridge self-sufficiency, thinking holistically across someone's life. So not just a financial coach or not just a life coach, but rather just looking across that person's life in all those different domains, and keeping in mind the executive functioning piece. So that is a longer conversation, but at the end of the day, the more you learn about executive functioning, whether it's in teenagers, young adults, or older participants, it's just important to know the value of those executive functioning skills, how they're impacted by stress and trauma, and how that being in survival mode often, or really does, push those executive functioning skills offline, and people aren't really able to really engage with them as actively if they've been in stressful, traumatic situations, often for many years over their lifetime. They're just not as easily able to engage with those. So through this coaching approach and really kind of trying to set the stage and giving the people that we're working with a safe space to engage with their executive functioning skills, to take a moment and start thinking about the future. So beyond tomorrow, beyond the end of this week, but more long term, 6 months down the road, a year, we're supporting them in kind of strengthening those executive functioning skills. So that's also built into when we're thinking about our coaching approach within mobility mentoring. Growth mindset, which I do hope you all had a chance to read our high expectations paper that our CEO, Beth Babcock, put out last year, and the high expectations right there fit really well together when thinking about how we approach our participants within mobility mentoring. So the high expectations piece for me is, and it's, I think sometimes it feels obvious, but at the same time, it's that when you're working with someone, we have to kind of view and believe, hold those expectations pretty high, so they themselves can see that they also can achieve that. So basically, if we can't see that person achieving a goal, how are they going to be able to believe in themselves if their supportive coach isn't quite sure if they can do it? So with that high expectations piece in mind, it's just this idea that we want to leave space. There's what we know is attainable, and then there's maybe that those harder to reach, more long-term goals that you may not be there to support that person, but you are setting the groundwork now to help them build that confidence, that belief that they can really achieve those goals that they set their mind to. And you can support them in building those skills to maybe achieve those much longer term goals when they're no longer with you. So the high expectations piece is just really leaving the space and not having our own preconceived notions of what people are able to do or able to achieve. And it's not that we're trying to set people up for failure. It's not that we hold expectations, all of our expectations unusually high, and then when they don't meet it, we're disappointed. It has more to do with leaving the space for people. If they are setting goals, if they are dreaming big, that we're here to support them along that journey. And maybe it won't be, maybe their goal is too big for now, or not really attainable until they do like 10 other steps. But it's just that belief that, why don't we start, we'll start at the beginning, and we'll start setting those goals and moving towards that big dream that you have. But just keeping in mind that you have to really believe that the people that you work with can achieve the things that they desire. The growth mindset piece too is really connected to the high expectations. So the idea of growth mindset is this, there's the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. And I think you've also have all heard about this a bit in the video that you watched recently, and possibly on out of the other documents that you reviewed. But I find that idea of the growth or fixed mindset really impactful in two ways. One, for us as coaches, is that with a fixed mindset, it's this idea that people are essentially born the way they are, that they have, these are their skills, and, it's very, very, very hard for them to do things that they're not naturally good at, or, that they just don't maybe have that talent. The growth mindset piece actually is maybe someone struggled with, math in the past, but that's in the past. With focus and maybe hard work or different resources, that you could grow, that person could get better at math, or that person could grow and do better in school. So this idea of growth mindset is that people are not just one way, or people are not fixed, but that you are able to, with hard work and really perseverance, that you can maybe do things that you didn't think you could in the past. That, what I just said there, was applying to the coaches, but it also applies to the people that you work with. Often our participants that have that maybe a growth mindset, but many have fixed mindsets as well, where they're like, well, I was just really bad at school, so I don't think I should go back. It's our, there's an opportunity then to bring up this idea of the growth or fixed mindset with the very people you work with, and say, actually, there's, what if that's, that's in the past, and what if we actually kind of try again and think about a different approach or different resources that could actually help. Maybe it will be different now that you're older, or the circumstances are different, and that people can grow and change over time. So that growth mindset definitely applies to both us as coaches, that we want to keep that growth mindset, that the people we work with can change and adapt if they work hard and focus on it. And then the same thing with participants, is that they might believe that they're also fixed in one way, that if they have talent or not, but that sharing with them that there's a different approach that they could take, and maybe they could be successful with a different approach and different support. So that growth mindset piece I have found, and that really kind of came out last year, and has added for me another layer to mobility mentoring that has really I think brought it home for me. finally, on the coaching piece, I just want to point out the belief and investment in the participant. So that, I mean, all of these things connect with each other, but for us, mobility mentoring is a partnering model. So we are, we believe, we are believing in our participants. We're here to support them as they're defining what self-sufficiency and economic mobility looks like for them. And, you know, we have resources, we have knowledge, and we're here to share that. What that also means, though, is that the people that we're working with often might have the answer or strategies or ideas, and also always giving them a chance to be the own driver in this journey. So essentially, this really gets back to, well, the coaching piece, which is what we're talking about right now, is that sometimes it's not always about us kind of putting out, you know, our expertise or advice right away, but rather, you know, engaging with that participant to see, like, they want to set a goal, like, you know, oh, I want to go back to school. Where do you think you should start? Or, you know, tell me about, you know, what's the last thing you did involving education? Or, you know, do you know, the first step in this goal? Often it's really valuable to kick out that first question, or remain to the people we're working with to see maybe they have ideas and strategies about how they will move forward. And if they don't, you're there with your expertise and your support. But the idea is that we're trying to move towards participant-driven goals, because, which makes sense, people are more motivated to complete goals or things that they set out for themselves. So, you know, my goal is to, if my goal is to, go back to school, then I'm more likely to pursue that. Where if I'm told that I have to do, if I have to go back to school, but I don't really want it, what's the likelihood that I will succeed in that goal? So often it's just important to kind of return back to that participant-driven goal. And so also that means that often we need to really engage with those participants when we're having these conversations. It's, we all want to really share our expertise and our knowledge, but sometimes it's important to hear what that person has to say. And maybe they say, I don't know, and that's fine, because you, then as a coach, you can kind of take it from there, or you can, or the next step, or you have a strategy. But I think that's also a very core piece of mobility mentoring, is that we're really trying to empower our participants to learn these skills. So learn how to plan, set, and achieve goals, to learn more about the structures that they live in, figure out how different systems work, figure out how, maybe more complicated goals are achieved. So when we're not around, they're able to do more things on their own. And maybe when something goes wrong, it doesn't turn into a crisis, but they actually have new strategies or skills to tackle that challenge. But I think that that whole spiel there, I think, touches on many of these different areas. But I think the belief and investment in participant is just a really core piece as a coach as well, because we're not always going to understand the choices of our participants, but it's also important to know that it's their life, and that we're here to support them as they're really feeling it out and figuring out, what direction they want to go in. And if they make a choice that we don't agree with, that can be hard, but just believing that they want what's best for them ultimately. And we're here to, set goals, to problem solve. And even if we don't understand something, that we still respect them as people, and that we're still able to, to remain invested into the future. So I think the coaching for economic mobility piece is just, it has a lot to do with the ethos and the approach that we use within mobility mentoring. And we're, for me, I just really view it as a way of, the tools are really just tools without thinking about how you approach that person using them, and that, keeping those high expectations in mind. So, and at the end of the day, that doesn't mean that, we set every goal that someone, desires. So in the United States, and I'm sure in many, many places, homeownership's a really popular, really big goal. if someone says, I want to buy a house, that's great. But at the same time, we're not here to say, okay, let's set that goal, but rather let's look into that and see what it takes to do that. And so instead of derailing that goal and maybe kind of squashing that person's dreams, we take a step back and we actually do research on the steps that it takes to get to homeownership. And that in and of itself would uncover so many other goals that would then maybe lead to that long-term goal. But it's often this idea that if you, as you're working with that person, we're not here to tell them, no, you can't do that. It's just more about how can we strategize to get you there at some point. So, you know, this is a long process. Moving out of poverty is a long process. Becoming self-sufficient is a long process for many. And, you know, we're here to really just often set the foundation. So over the long term, folks can maybe get those, you know, achieve those goals that they really want. Recognition, I had mentioned just earlier, and the recognition piece, again, here are just some examples on trying, it's one way, it's built into the model to help us to build that extrinsic motivation that will then turn into intrinsic motivation. So our way of, we just find it really important to recognize people's achievements to start building that self-efficacy. So that belief that you, as a person, that you can set and achieve goals. And that in and of itself can then, as someone builds stronger and stronger self-efficacy, they can then set more longer term, harder goals, and then they have enough motivation to really get to that point. So the recognition piece for us is just really important to both just celebrate the hard work and recognize that what we're asking people to do is often hard, and it's often on top of, you know, other things that they're doing, and that there's value in what they're doing. So setting and achieving goals, you know, does build up to value over the long term. And then, of course, the hope is that over time people see the value themselves and then start building that intrinsic motivation to really kind of pursue these goals even into the future when they're no longer working with coaches or in particular programs. So that's my bit on the 4 essential elements. I hope that was helpful. There's always a lot to talk about when we're thinking about the model and the different pieces that feed into the different elements. Here is the Economic Mobility Exchange. This is a department that I work with, and these are the current exchange members. And this is, so you all are part of this learning network. And I know that you have, many of you have had portal access. If you do not have portal access, please let me know. My whole role as at the exchange is to support our members. So I'm happy to answer questions. As I said at the very beginning of this, it would be great to do a Q&A session in the future. Following this presentation, when you watch it, if questions come up about different pieces or models, not models, elements, I'm happy to help and happy to answer those questions. But I am very excited for you all to get started in using the model and the variety of other resources that you, I know you have received. And thank you so much for your time. Once again, please do reach out if you have questions. And I look forward to hearing about your work and seeing where the project goes over time. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.